The Confederacy of Independent Systems, like most other Star Wars factions, employed many models of tank in its campaigns against the Republic, some of which required crews and some of which did not. As they did with many of their starfighters, the CIS often employed tanks that were actually just massive droids, which served to simplify coordination for droid army commanders. The CIS had many models of tank droid at its disposal, with some of the most common being the Corporate Alliance Persuader class, IGBC Hellfire droids and ground armored tanks, and Techno-Union Octuptara Magna tri-droids. But of all of the tank droids commonly employed by the Confederacy, there was one that clone troopers feared the most: the Commerce Guild's OG-9 homing spider droid. In this video, we're going to be taking an in-depth look at this fearsome war machine.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Now, we should preface this video by saying that while the OG-9 was feared by clones, that doesn't necessarily make it the most destructive or even the scariest tank droid. For example, the Colicoids, Proto-Decker, and Scorpionic Annihilator droids probably outclassed the OG-9 in both categories. However, those units, as with other units that might seem more terrifying than the homing spider droid, were quite rare, and so the clone troopers didn't come to fear them as much. Fear, after all, is subjective and not always logical, and it's heavily tied to a traumatic experience, especially repeated traumatic experience. As a result, while the OG-9 was likely the tank droid clones feared the most, this is not the same as saying it was the toughest nor the scariest tank droid the CIS had at its disposal. The OG-9 homing spider droid was designed by Battle-Hardened Armor Workshop. At the time, Battle-Hardened was looking to expand its catalogue of war droids, as it had recently raked in a boatload of credits for its role in producing the Trade Federation droid army. However, its plans for greater profits were dashed after the Battle of Naboo, as Battle-Hardened Armor Workshop was formally liquidated in the battle's aftermath. Battle-Hardened Armor Workshop, alongside its sister company, Battle-Hardened Combat Automata, continued operating in secret, but it nonetheless sold off most of its assets as part of its public dismantling, including the designs for the OG-9. Ultimately, those designs ended up in the hands of the Commerce Guild. Like the Trade Federation, the Commerce Guild was already using Battle-Hardened droids, specifically the DSD-1 Dwarf Spider droid. Under Presidente Shumei, the Commerce Guild punitive security forces had employed scores of DSD-1s for strike-breaking purposes, a task at which the droids proved incredibly effective. But the Commerce Guild wanted something heavier for its private army, and the OG-9 fit the bill perfectly. The Commerce Guild quietly commissioned thousands of homing spider droids at 70,000 credits each from Battle-Hardened and the Geonosians, and the final designs for the droids were tweaked to fit the guild's needs. The OG-9 homing spider droid was basically a walking weapons platform. Its heavily armoured central orb contained a powerful reactor as well as the unit's limited droid brain. Typically, they received orders directly from central control computers, as they didn't have any sort of individual personalities and only possessed the most basic form of sentience. When a central control computer was unavailable, they relied on programmed military protocols and internal logic processes, which were simple but effective. Homing spider droids navigated with 4 hydraulic legs, which allowed them to operate across a variety of terrain types, including steep cliffs and seabeds. OG-9s were a little over 7 meters in height, and they had a top speed of 90 kilometers per hour, though in practice, they tended to move much slower. Weapons-wise, homing spider droids featured precision homing lasers, anti-personnel laser cannons, and retractable ion cannons. The latter weapon was rarely used and was intended to help the droids disable starships. The other two were mounted on the top and bottom of the droid's central orbs respectively. The anti-personnel laser cannons were intended to take care of infantry and light vehicles that got too close, and they were quite powerful for anti-personnel weapons. The precision homing lasers, on the other hand, were extraordinarily powerful weapons meant for disabling vehicles, though they were effective against infantry as well. Unlike laser cannons, these weapons fired actual concentrated laser beams, which could be fired in short bursts for precision strikes or longer pulses to pierce shields or melt armor. These weapons could shoot down starfighters, melt clean through heavy tanks, and scythe down formations of advancing infantry. The Commerce Guild intended the OG-9 to be used in 2 capacities, as anti-vehicular units and as coordinators. Homing spider droids were officially classified as self-propelled artillery units, somewhat like the Republic's SBHAT, and the punitive security forces likely only brought them to bear against full-fledged insurrections. In direct combat, they would easily be able to shred large groups of insurgents and destroy both ground-based vehicles and starfighters. Additionally, the Commos Guild had the OG-9 design so it could network with the DSD-1 dwarf spider droids, allowing it to act as a coordinator for the smaller droids. Dwarf spider droids typically employed their larger cousins as a sort of hive mind, sending constant feeds from their various scanner systems back to the OG-9s for analysis. The OG-9s would then be able to communicate useful information back to all DSD-1s connected to its network. The Commos Guild generally used this link in two ways. If an OG-9 was deployed alone, it could signal for dwarf spider droids to reinforce it in a pinch. More commonly, groups of DSD-1s were deployed as scouts, which would split up, search for targets, and bring a homing spider droid over if they found one. The punitive security forces grouped OG-9s into spider droid units, which consisted of 1 OG-9 and 4 DSD-1s. When the Clone Wars erupted on Geonosis, OG-9 homing spider droids and their dwarf spider droid counterparts were deployed in large numbers. The Commos Guild dispatched 7,500 OG-9s to cover the retreat of their starships, and though the Republic ultimately won the day, these fearsome tank droids definitely proved their worth, as even the Jedi that were present on Geonosis walked from the battle knowing that the OG-9s were not to be trifled with. Following the Battle of Geonosis, the Commos Guild punitive security forces were folded into the CIS military, and the Guild's spider droids became a part of the droid army. Homing spider droids were used a bit differently in the Clone Wars than they had been used previously. The Confederacy deployed homing spider droids in much greater numbers than the Commos Guild had, upping the average ratio of OG-9s to DSD-1s from 1 to 4 to 1 to 2. The OG-9 quickly became a favourite of the Separatist commanders. After Geonosis, they saw extensive use in both the Hunt for the Decimator and the Dark Reaper Crisis, two of the war's earliest campaigns, as well as in battles on Atrakan, Tayer, Munilinst, Hypori, Brental 4, Jabim, Praesitlin, Sarish, Zagobar, Baldemnik, Seleucami, and Felucia, just to name a few. The Republic's clone troopers quickly learned to fear the OG-9 more so than any of the other Separatist droids. Of the units commonly deployed by the CIS, no other droid combined destructive potential and a lack of easily exploitable weaknesses, as well as the homing spider droid. The similarly feared Hailfire droid at least would run quickly out of missiles, while the homing spider droid had no such shortcomings. It did have a few weaknesses, however. If its reactor core was punctured, it would violently explode and destroy the whole droid, and if one of its legs were destroyed, the whole droid would fall over. But these reactors were well armoured and very hard to pierce, and destroying the legs was easier said than done. Furthermore, none of these weaknesses could be exploited by clone infantry. If you were on foot and up against one of these bad boys, your only hope was to get right under it, which obviously was virtually impossible. But that's not the only reason why clones were terrified of the OG-9. They were quite destructive on top of their lack of exploitable weaknesses. If you were up against a homing spider droid, nothing was guaranteed to save you, not even LAATs or ATTEs, which the Republic relied upon so heavily in the early years of the conflict. The main laser of the OG-9 could destroy practically anything, from air support to SBHATs. Most Republic vehicles would go down with one shot from this powerful weapon, and once vehicles were dealt with, homing spider droids would turn their lasers on infantry to devastating effect. They would fire the weapons in the sort of sustained bursts used to melt through heavy armor, and then sweep them across infantry formations, gruesomely butchering entire platoons. It was this fate that most of the 416th Star Corps met in the Battle of Tayer, an extremely bloody battle which took place 3 months into the Clone Wars. On Tayer, Jedi General Crook and the 416th were sent to destroy a crashed core ship that droid units had turned into a bunker. A core ship that had been carrying hordes of spider droids. The Republic ultimately won the battle, but the droids fought so fiercely that nearly all of the clones present were killed. Many of them were sliced up by the homing lasers of the OG-9s, which were able to claim a strategic firing position and easily pick off the advancing clones. Kakruk was so horrified by the carnage of this battle that, for a short time, he abandoned the Jedi Order entirely. The icing on the cake is that, even if a clone were to hide somewhere an OG-9 couldn't reach, the droids would still be able to call in DSD-1s to flush them out. Dwarf spider droids were almost always deployed alongside their larger cousins, and since they were specifically designed to fight in tight spaces, this meant that even hiding was ineffective against homing spider droids. All clones could do when faced against OG9s in battle was pray their side had enough firepower to finish them quickly. As the Clone Wars progressed, the Republic started to develop new kinds of armoured vehicles, many of which had a better chance against the OG9s. But by this point, fear of the homing spider droid had spread throughout the clone ranks, and it was too entrenched to be allayed by some shiny new piece of hardware. By the Outer Rim sieges, hardened veterans and even Jedi would hesitate when these monstrous droid walkers appeared on the battlefield. So that was our look at the OG9 homing spider droid, the tank droid clones feared the most. But what do you think? Would you like to see us take a look at the other Separatist droid vehicles like the Hailfire or the Dwarf Spider droid? Let us know in the comments section below. And just before you go guys, if you want to hear the music we used in this video unobstructed, make sure you check out our Relax Jack music channel, where you can listen to all these beats and actually use some of them for your creative projects as well. And if you just want to join our wider Geetsly's community, check us out on our main Geetsly's Discord, where you can chat to myself and other Star Wars fans, and our Geetsly's Gaming Network, where you can play games with other Star Wars fans. Anyways guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.